This is an awesome trail bike and it's optimised to be amazing everywhere. All trails, whether you're riding up, whether you're riding down, whether you're riding across. But can we unleash its DH performance with some choice selections of spec and some little upgrades? Let's find out. As a rider that started on a rigid bike, modern trail bikes, like this Canyon Neuron, are awesome. We've got great geometry. It's not all XC and steep, so on downhills they're not scary. You've got great suspension kinematics, so there's no odd falling rates where it blows through the travel. And we've got brakes that stop on a dime. Okay, we say downhills and we mean downhill sections of trail because a trail bike is a trail bike, and that sounds a bit like a health and safety warning, and to a degree it is. Lots of bikes are designed with specific criteria to meet a certain category of bike. They're also tested to certain certifications and standards. So if you take your trail bike and racing downhill, it's probably a recipe that's not going to end well. So these are tips to make your trail bike more downhill capable, not turning it into a DH racer. So we're going to talk through 4 areas. We're going to talk about tyres, we're going to talk about suspension, we're going to talk about ergonomics and brakes to turn your trail bike into the most capable downhill trail bike it can be. Tyres might look all quite similar. They're black, they're round, but switching to a DH or Enduro casing can make a really big difference. The tread lugs are much deeper, the sidewalls and structure and carcass are much more supportive and help at lower pressure. So it can really transform your trail bike's DH capabilities. It's a really deep topic and we've done whole videos on it. There's a link here. But essentially, because your tyre is, well, your first contact point, hopefully only for a lot of your riding, and also the first part of your suspension system, changing those can make a really big difference to on-trail performance. If you're looking at switching tyres, now might be a good opportunity to look or re-look at tubeless. There's lots of benefits to puncture protection, but also gives you the ability to safely run the tyres at a lower pressure. Tyre tech is a huge topic, and one aspect that we need to talk about is compounds. Essentially, lots of tyres can come in different compounds. The Enduro and DH racers have huge spectrums of tyre choice and lots of different durometers, so that's how soft the tyres are to choose from. Essentially, softer tyres can grip a lot more, especially in kind of wet conditions. Essentially though, all that grip comes at a cost, and that does mean that they don't often last as long because they can wear out quickly because they're soft, and also they do generally roll quite a bit slower. So as a compromise on your trail bike, you can run a softer compound tyre up front and then a normal compound on the back. So the benefits you'll get is you'll get the extra grip and traction up front, and then at the back you'll get, well, a longer lasting tyre, and it probably most likely will roll a little bit quicker. So it's a fun compromise. As an extra bit of insurance, you could run an insert. Okay, so these are foam inserts that fit inside your tubeless tyre, and it creates, well, a barrier between your tyre and the rim hitting something really hard. And it can save your tyre, it can also save your wheel. There are pros and cons to it, but for extra insurance, they're brilliant. Changing your suspension setup is a great way to boost traction and grip. Now, like all things bike, do please read the manual, because with suspension components, well, A, they're really expensive, so if you kind of get it wrong, it can be an expensive mistake. And also, it's easy to misunderstand where you can put spacers and where you can't, so do read the manual. Right, we're going to do some changes to spring rate and damping rate. First stage of setting suspension is to set the spring rate. What does that mean? Well, that's setting how much spring force you're going to overcome. It's also called preload, because it's preloading the spring. It's also called sag, and that's what we'll try and stick to when we're describing how to set it up. Essentially, all bikes are going to be slightly different. With suspension forks, it's pretty simple these days. Lots of the forks have got a guide of how much you weigh with all your kit on, so helmet, if you've got a camelback on, all of that, and you'll be able to set the sag. So it's often around 25 to 20% sag. Because the fork's got a 1-to-1 travel, i.e. if it's got 140 mil of travel, the fork literally moves 140. It's relatively easy to understand and to set sag. With rear suspension, it gets a little bit complicated because the shock stroke here isn't exactly the same as the actual travel at the wheel, but most brands will give you a really good guide. So with this Canyon Neuron, they recommend 27% to 30% sag. Now, because we're looking for a more aggressive ride characteristic, and we're going to be pushing the bike a lot more, we're going to aim for that 27% sag. So less sag, the bike's going to sit up a little bit taller. Hopefully that should mean that we'll resist a harsh bottom out when we're hitting technical terrain, both on the rear suspension and the fork. Damping. Now, this is a very deep topic. There's lots to talk about and it can get really jargony very quickly, but essentially damping is the control to the spring force. And that means that when your fork hits something, it controls both in compression, so as you're pressing into an object, and also on rebound when it's sitting back up into that sagged position. So it's a really important characteristic to tune. If you've increased your spring rate, you will have to adjust your damping because they're proportional to each other. So we'll start with rebound, as it's the most common adjustment that you'll get on forks and rear shocks, because often compression can be preset, but rebound we can make an adjustment to. I would always err on the side of slightly faster fork. So if it feels perfect in the car park, maybe try a click faster. Why? Well, if you're riding really aggressive terrain and you've got a lot of damping control, especially rebound, in a worst case, especially on the fork, what can happen is your fork can hit a bump, it can't then recoil or rebound quick enough to absorb the next bump, so it gets stuck in this travel cycle of nibbling into its travel until, well, in a worst case, you've got no travel left, which often results in a kind of direct exit over the bars. So set it slightly faster than you need, and that works on the back as well. With compression damping on both shocks and forks, it's often used as a setting to help control pedal bob or pedal movement. So often you might see it with like maybe a pro pedal or something similar to that. And these platforms are great when you're climbing, but if you're descending and you're looking for maximum grip, opening the shock up, so turning any of these dials to the minimum, often they're controlling the low speed compression. So if you've got a fancier shock or fancier fork with low speed compression and high speed compression, if you dial a low speed compression off, hopefully that will help. If you've got high speed adjustment as well on both your fork and shock, I would err on the side of less damping because it allows the shock just to move through its travel as best it can. It's not going to get choked up by trying to dampen control. But if you're looking for more support as the fork or as the shock is moving through its travel, often some high speed damping support can help get a little bit more traction. If you've got an air shock, there's extra adjustment that you can do with fun things called volume spacers. So that's a fork one and there's a shock one. Volume spacers, what's that all about? Okay, brief bit of science. With an air spring, when it compresses, that air gets denser, so it actually changes the pressure inside. So it offers a ramp up. So opposed to a spring curve, if you think of squashing a coil spring, for example, it's really linear. So the force that you need to compress it at the start is the same at the end. Whereas with an air spring, with this compressive nature of the air and the spring, it means that the force actually ramps up towards the end. So you need more force to actually bottom out the shock or the fork. Suspension designers have worked with this and worked sort of around it. So lots of fork manufacturers have tried to work against this so that the fork feels really linear and it doesn't have this ramp up. So it feels like you're getting lots of travel. Now for us, we can use that to our advantage by playing with these spacers and reducing that air volume down, because that will change this air spring characteristic and mean that it ramps up a lot. It means that you might be able to run a suppler fork, so on the small bumps and little chatter, the bike's very active, but opposed to without any of the volume spacers, it blowing through all that travel because the fork or shock is undersprung, we've now got this ramp up of the spring curve changing. So it offers us extra adjustment. It can get a little bit complicated, but essentially it means we can run it softer for more soft grip and grip on sort of little bumps and trail detritus, but it gives us this more bigger support and more ramp up for bottom out and big compressions. Bar width is a very broad topic. We're going to skim over it here because there's a lot to talk about, but essentially for us, it's proportional. So if you've got a really wide wingspan and the matching strength, then a wide bar can really suit you. I guess a good analogy would be if you did press-ups in a really wide stance, or if you did them in a really narrow stance, there's going to be an optimal point. And for me, I feel like for lots of riders, that's probably under the 800mm that lots of bars come with. And it's not just me, lots of really fast racers also run narrower bars. So lots of the DH racers run sort of sub 780mm, and lots of the enduro enduro riders are running around 750mm bars. Okay, maybe that's because enduro tracks are really tight and twisty, but for me, I think it's indicative that it's this proportional thing and it's worth playing with. So don't just stick with really wide bars. A narrow bar might help you. Majority of modern trail bikes are going to have a bar with some sweep and some rise, and that kind of synergy between the back sweep, up sweep and the rise mean that you can position your hands in a really good position or a slightly awkward one. So play around with the position. A neutral position is getting the bar rise in line with the steerer tube, so kind of in line with the head angle. Often downhill racers who want to move their body weight backwards, which is probably what we're aiming to do too, we want to maybe roll those bars back, which will help us move our weight further back on the steeper downhills. If you're looking to help move the body weight up even further, so you're riding more steep stuff and enjoying it, look for a handlebar with a little bit more rise. Lots of trail bikes these days come with quite low rise bars. So these on this bike are only 15mm. So you could go up 30mm and go for a 45mm, which would literally move your hands up about 40mm, which would be great when you're attacking aggressive trails. If you're not looking to splash the cash on a new handlebar just yet, a quick hack, if you've got space on your steer tube, is to run the stem at the top. So make sure there's at least kind of one 5mm spacer at the top so you're not crimping your steer tube, but running 20 or 30mm underneath can give you an idea of what a higher rise bar and a higher hand position can feel like. Stems have definitely shrunk as top tubes on modern trail bikes have grown substantially, but don't worry, there's still room to play for. If you've got a 60 or 50mm stem, you could go smaller, maybe down to a 45 or even a 40, and that'll help move your body weight back and add a bit of stability on the steep stuff. Grips are extremely personal, and many trail bikes come with really nice lock-on grips these days, and as a mechanic I really like a lock-on grip. They're just a bit easier to work with. The old logic from lots of downhill racers and lots of people who like to get aggressive on downhills was to run a very, very thin grip for lots of feel, and I fell into this trap because in the car park these thin grips do feel lovely. However, midway down a rough and rocky trail, well, there's no damping, there's no padding, there's no support. So now my hands have gotten a bit older, I definitely look for a grip with more lugs for traction, so if your hand's a bit muddy, you get grip, and also lots more rubber and lots more damping, because it just means that my hands don't have to work as hard to stay on the bar. So it is personal, but hunt around. There's some really good dedicated DH grips that have got more padding than you might imagine. Brake lever position is, like grips, really personal. However, if you've set them up for an all-round perfect position, well, a little bit of tweaking for the fun bits of trail can really work. And how to do that? Well, get those levers up higher. And okay, they will feel odd when you're riding sort of along the flat or on a climb, but when you hit the steeper stuff and your body weight moves back, that lever position will be perfect. Final contact point, and there's still some tweaks that we can do. So I'm running flats today, but I can still do some extra bonus points to get a bit more traction. Crank Brothers, like quite a few brands out there, do a longer pin kit. So the pins that screw in are longer, so they just bite into your shoes more. They can bite into your shins too, so do be careful, but aim for the corners to get the most grip, and it also gives you a nice sort of concave platform to get lots of bite in. With clips, there's still options too. So if you've got a trail clip like this, really good for lots of the trail, but we're trying to kind of optimize our bike for just one segment. So switching to a larger platform can help, and not really for pedaling performance. No, it's more when you're unclipped and you're sliding around a corner and you need to find that pedal fast. The bigger platform means it's easier to clip in. We've talked a lot about making you faster. We've talked about making the bike absorb bumps better. We've talked about getting more traction from the tyres and changing your body position, all to go faster. But you also need to be able to stop quicker too. And checking out your brakes is a great way of being able to stop quicker so you can ride faster. We've looked at brake position. Also time to look at, well, calipers and pads and rotors. Before you run out and go and buy some amazing downhill brakes that mean that you can go down a rotor size, there's stuff that you can do to the brakes that you've got on your trail bike to make them work better. One is give them a bleed. So getting the fluid in fresh, whether it be DOT or mineral oil, and making sure there's no detritus or contamination can make your brakes work better. Doing a pad reset is also good. So that's where you make sure that the pads are pushing in parallel. So we're not squiff, we're not rubbing. So it's really smooth and you've got more braking power. In terms of braking power, there's other things you can do as well. So switching from a resin pad, so that's one where it's often called organic, which in the dry can grip quite well. they can feel a little bit tackier and spongier, but in wet conditions, well, on some descents you can eat through a set of resin pads really quickly. So switching to sintered gives you a firmer lever feel and also better braking in wet and gritty conditions. I guess the next thing to have a look at is rotor size. Anna's done a fantastic video on upping rotor size. This is whereby, because we're moving the caliper out from where the axle is, we're boosting leverage, and it means that you've got more braking power. So again, before you run out and get those new brakes, have a look at all the things that you could do. New pads, new rotors, and a bleed. But yeah, if all of that fails, bigger brakes are going to help you ride more aggressively because you'll be able to stop on a dime. Some bikes come with flip chips. This is like a little chip where the shock is mounted, or it can be where a link is mounted on the bike, and it means that you can change your geometry. Often it will lower the bottom bracket and slacken the head angle. That's great for a more stable ride. The other option that some bikes provide is a mixed wheel size, so running a smaller wheel on the back, and it offers similar benefits. You're going to drop the bottom bracket, and you're going to make the front end a little bit slacker. But just be mindful that not all bikes you can flip and chip with, and not all bikes are allowed to run with a MX wheel size or mixed wheel size, so just be careful and check those instructions. Oh, gee. Bikes like these are awesome. I know I've used that expression, but genuinely, trail bikes can be brilliant, and with some small tweaks to tyres, sorting out your suspension, getting your cockpit just right, we can make a do-it-all trail, well, still a do-it-all trail bike, but one that's just awesome at the fun bits of trail. If you've liked this and you found it helpful, just like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments.